Welcome to our dive into the shadows, where we trace the evolution of one of humanity's most enduring legends, the vampire. From ancient Mesopotamian demons to the seductive aristocrats of Gothic literature, and finally to the modern cinematic icons that haunt our screens, Night Stalkers have transformed with every era's fears and fantasies. In this video, we'll uncover how cultures shaped the vampire myth, why these creatures refuse to fade, and what their changing forms reveal about us. Prepare to journey through history's darkest corners as we unravel the timeless power of the undead and their lasting grip on imagination. The medieval vampire pestilence and paranoia. The year was 1349, when the sun dimmed behind horizons of dust and grief. Across the valley of Schwanfeld stood a village huddled beneath a rotting palisade, its gates bound with iron, its wells sealed with stones, and its people whispering of a sickness that moved swifter than the plague itself. They said the dead were walking, not as ghosts in sermons or saints in visions, but as creatures hungry for the breath of the living. It began, the elders said, on an evening when the church bell tolled though no hand pulled its rope. Father Lucas, the parish priest, swore it rang because the Holy Spirit wished to warn them. Others said the rope had been severed and some unseen thing had dragged the clapper across bronze. 3 days later, the first corpse stirred. Clara, daughter of a miller, had died just after midsummer. Her cheeks had gone black with swollen buboes, her tongue cracked, and her final breath escaped in a rattle so violent her mother could not bear to stay in the room. They buried her quickly, like all the dead, with lime poured over her and a wooden stake laid across her chest, not driven in, but placed as a warning. On the third night her brother, Thomas, woke screaming. He claimed his sister had stood at the foot of his bed, her eyes red as coals, her lips torn and moist, whispering, "I am cold. Let me in." The adults blamed fever. The priest sprinkled holy water. The boy fell silent. But in the morning, 3 goats had been found drained, their bodies pale and empty like bladders wrung dry. The people of Schwanfeld had no word for such a horror except Nachzehrer, the after-chewer, the dead who fed upon the living from within the grave. Tales of these creatures had dripped down from the mountains for generations, but no one believed they would wander the river valley. Superstitions were tolerated as long as they stayed in the forests, with wolves and witches and winter spirits. But when the dead stirred in one's own village, fear grew teeth. By August, the sickness spread, not just bubonic fever, but something else, a wasting that left victims pale and trembling, unable to sleep, terrified to let darkness touch them. "The pestilence is no longer a plague," whispered old Greta, the herb wife. "It drinks blood." The council refused to hear her. They were men of grain and taxes, not stories. But Greta's knowledge ran deeper than the priest's Latin or the council's ledgers. She had seen strange illnesses before, in distant winters, when wolves walked close to the hearths. "It is hunger," she muttered. Hunger returned to flesh that should have stayed dead. Thomas, the boy who had seen his sister at his bedside, worsened. He lost weight no matter how much stew his mother forced on him. 2 puncture marks, faint, like bruises, appeared on his neck. Every night he claimed Clara scratched at the shutters. Father Lucas forbade witchcraft talk. "The pestilence tempts us to madness," he preached. "Demons thrive where reason dies." Yet his own faith wavered when he saw blood smeared on the outside of Thomas's window. The villagers met in secret. Fear thickened their voices. "It must be Clara. She's draining her own brother. She's cursed. Then she must be hunted." "Hunted? She's in the earth. Then we go to the earth." And so a mob assembled under a moon thin as a sickle. Torches flared like bitter stars. They marched to the graveyard, mud swallowing their boots, the smell of decay rising like warm breath. Greta stood among them, carrying a bundle of hawthorn, a sharpened spade, and a vial of salt. They reached Clara's grave. The earth bulged slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make hearts pound. "Dig," someone whispered. The sound of metal biting soil echoed in the chilled night. Shovels moved like frantic wings, scattering earth until wood was exposed. The coffin vibrated. Someone screamed. The lid was pried open. Those nearest stumbled backward, gagging. Clara's eyes were open. Dirt clung to her lips, but no rot clouded her skin. Her limbs were tensed as if she had clawed the coffin from inside. She looks alive." "No," Greta said. "Not alive. Not dead." The villagers argued, burn her, stake her, cut her head, leave her, pray over her. But Greta acted first. She reached into the coffin and pressed her fingers beneath Clara's jaw. "She is cold," she said, "and empty." She turned to the priest. "This is not a child. This is the sickness-given flesh." They dragged the body onto the grass. Greta drove the hawthorn stake through its heart. The ground trembled, or perhaps fear made it seem so. A hiss spilled from Clara's mouth as if air were being forced out of a bellows. The priest muttered prayers until his voice cracked. The villagers burned the corpse to ash. But the plague did not stop. Within days another child grew pale. The goats died one by one. A shepherd found his flock butchered, necks torn open. Night after night, villagers reported seeing shadows moving against the windows. The council blamed Greta. "You meddled in cursed rites," they said. "You angered the spirits." But she only shook her head. "This is no spirit. This is disease. And disease spreads." The priest, torn between scripture and terror, sought Greta in private. "Is this truly some infection of the dead?" "It is pestilence mixed with hunger," she answered. "When the plague takes a body, sometimes the soul lingers, gnawing on itself. Sometimes it gnaws outward. Then how do we stop it? We starve it. Seal the village. Burn the corpses before the sickness can rise. Protect the living with salt and iron." But the council refused to isolate the village. Trade was their lifeblood, and starvation frightened them more than monsters. So the sickness grew. Thomas vanished one night. His bed was empty, the shutters broken outward. Footprints, small, childlike, but deep, led toward the river. Search parties followed them until dawn. Near the old willow they found him, pale as bone, teeth stained red. "Where is your sister?" they asked. Thomas looked past them, into the trees. "She said I could stay with her." "Where is she, boy?" "Everywhere." That was the last straw. The villagers turned again to the graveyard, not to dig, but to burn. Every corpse buried in the past month was exhumed. Some showed signs of scratching. Some had split lips and broken teeth. Some were twisted as if they had tried to rise. All were burned. Smoke poured over the village. Ash drifted down like gray snowfall. Mothers wept as flames devoured husbands and children already claimed by death. Still, the pestilence crept. One night Father Lucas saw something perched on the church roof, slim, hunched, long-fingered. It stared down at him with eyes like dying embers. Trails of ash blew off its body like dust in the wind. He dropped his lantern. The creature vanished into the night. The next morning the priest announced a plan. "We must leave this place," he said. "The dead own it now." But the council forbade escape. "Other towns will blame us for spreading plague," they argued. "We will be hunted like thieves. Better to hold here." Yet that evening the council hall was found empty, the chairs overturned, the walls streaked with blood. No bodies remained, only claw marks on the floor. Fear hollowed the villagers. Each family barred its doors, but the scratching always returned. Windows darkened with strange shapes. Livestock died, drained and folded like emptied skins. People whispered of wings beating softly across rooftops. Greta stood before the church with a lantern in hand. "This is no village now," she said. "This is a graveyard pretending to live. The pestilence will not rest until it consumes us all." The villagers begged her to lead them. So she gathered salt, iron tools, and torches. She instructed them to form a circle around the chapel, the oldest and most sacred building. "If any place is safe, it is here," she said. "If any place can shelter us until dawn." The night that followed was colder than winter. Creatures emerged from the shadows, thin, pale forms with sunken faces and twitching limbs. Some crawled like spiders, others lurched like drunks. Torches flared as the villagers fought, swinging iron bars and shovels. Screams pierced the air. The dead swarmed like locusts. Greta stood at the church door, chanting prayers older than scripture. Salt scattered in the wind. The priest joined her, holding high the cross, its metal burning red from torchlight. One by one, the monsters fell, not because they were slain, but because the horizon brightened. As the first light of dawn bled across the sky, the creatures shrieked, their bodies cracking, blistering, crumbling like clay in a fire. They collapsed into heaps of ash. The survivors counted only 16 people left. The village of Schwanfeld emptied that morning. Those who lived walked away without looking back, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and the memory of a plague that devoured the dead and the living alike. Years later, travelers spoke of a valley where no birds sang, where the earth smelled faintly of ash, and where shadows moved unnaturally beneath the moon. And some nights, when the mist was thick, they heard a bell ringing. A bell no hand had touched. Explanation, 300 words. The medieval vampire pestilence and paranoia blends historical reality with folklore to explore how people in the Middle Ages interpreted disease, especially during the Black Death, 1347 to 1351. When faced with mass death, limited medical knowledge, and overwhelming fear, communities often turned to supernatural explanations. 1. Historical roots. During plague outbreaks, bodies frequently decayed in unusual ways, bloated, bleeding from the mouth, or purging fluids. To medieval people unfamiliar with decomposition, these signs resembled what later became associated with vampirism. Some European regions used terms like Nachzehrer or Striege to describe revenants, the dead who returned to harm the living. People really did exhume corpses they believed were dangerous. Stake or burn bodies. Blame disease on supernatural forces. This story fictionalizes a village facing such paranoia amplified by real plague symptoms. 2. Themes. Fear as contagion. The true pestilence is both biological and psychological. Disease spreads, but so does panic. The unknown becomes monstrous. The villagers cannot explain the plague, so they impose familiar narratives, vampires, to make the horror feel manageable. Authority versus superstition. The priest and council rely on doctrine or denial, while the herbalist Greta blends ancient knowledge with pragmatism. Their conflicting interpretations worsen the crisis. Death blurring into life. The undead represent the boundary between misunderstood science, post-mortem gas release, skin tightening, etc., and myth. 3. Paranoia as survival. The villagers are not evil, they act out of terror. Their extreme measures reflect how societies under existential threat often turn to scapegoating, ritual, and violence in attempts to regain control. The 18th century vampire panic. The year was 1732, and winter clung to the Serbian frontier like a jealous spirit. Snow, gray as ash, lay heavy on the roofs of the village of Kiselova, weighed down not only by cold but by fear. A rumor, one of many, had reached the imperial outpost at Belgrade. People were dying in unnatural ways, and the villagers blamed a man who had been dead for months. Lieutenant Matthias Riedel, an Austrian field surgeon attached to the Habsburg army, was ordered to investigate. Riedel was not a superstitious man. He had seen battle wounds that tore men apart, and illnesses that wasted them down to mere shadows. But he also knew fear could make honest peasants swear to impossible things. When he arrived in Kiselova at dusk, the first sound he heard was not welcome but a wail, half grief, half terror. A woman clutching an icon of St. George ran across the square and knelt before him. "Lieutenant, save us," she cried. "Mika Petrovich has returned from the grave. He presses upon our chests at night and steals our breath." Riedel dismounted, exhaustion already tugging at him. "Madam, the dead cannot return." She looked up with an expression that chilled him more than the wind. "Then why do the living die?" Riedel asked for the elder of the village. An old man named Elijah shuffled forward, lantern in hand. His beard was white, his eyes sunken but sharp. "You must come," Elijah said. "2 more died last night." "Of the same illness?" Riedel asked. Elijah shook his head. "Of him." They walked through the snow toward a small cottage lit by flickering candles. Inside lay a man no older than 30, pale as milk, lips tinged blue. A priest hovered over him, murmuring prayers. Riedel examined the body. No wound. No fever. Only murmurs around him. Just like the others. First, nightmares. Then wasting. He came to them at night, they felt him sitting on their chests. The classic description of Nachnik, the night spirit of local folklore. Or perhaps, Riedel thought, an illness, tuberculosis, plague, poisoning? He stayed in the village for 2 nights. On the second night, he interviewed the widow of the supposed culprit, Mika Petrovich. She whispered, "He died suddenly, Lieutenant. 3 days after he returned from the frontier. Sickness took him. But then others began to fall ill the same way. They saw him in their dreams." "And you believe he rises from the grave?" Her hands trembled. I do not want to believe it. But the others insist. And what else explains this? By the third day, the villagers demanded the unthinkable. Exhume him. Riedel refused. There must be natural causes. But he knew his orders: document the situation, maintain stability, and prevent local unrest. If denying them meant violence, against each other or against the military, he had no authority to stop the ritual. And so, just before dawn, lanterns bobbing in a silent procession, they walked to the graveyard. Snow crunched under their feet as if the earth resisted being disturbed. Elijah, with solemn reverence, broke the frozen soil. It took hours. When the coffin lid finally gave way, several villagers recoiled. Riedel forced himself to examine the body. For a man dead months, Mika Petrovich looked strangely intact. His cheeks were ruddy. His nails seemed longer. A dark, viscous fluid stained his mouth. Blood, someone screamed. Not blood, Riedel muttered. Liquefaction of the organs. Very normal in decomposition. But the villagers would not hear reason. He feeds on us still, one said. He is not dead, said another. Riedel opened Mika's mouth with a gloved hand. The liquid was indeed reddish, but that too could be explained: internal blood pooling. Still, the villagers murmured with fear like a hive of bees about to swarm. We must stake him. Elijah's voice trembled, but his resolve did not. Or more will die. Riedel stepped forward. This is superstition. Desecration of a corpse is. The Empire sent you to stop our deaths, Elijah interrupted. Not to lecture us. Riedel hesitated. If he forbade them, they might rebel. Men and women, terrified and exhausted, did not think rationally. They clutched their icons and crosses, waiting. Very well, he said quietly, hating the words as he spoke them. But I must record everything. And I must perform the act myself. Gasps rippled through the group. But something in his voice, resignation, perhaps compassion, calmed them. He chose a wooden stake, carved hastily from an oak branch. Mika's corpse lay still in the pale light, almost peaceful, as if asleep. I am sorry, Riedel whispered. He drove the stake downward, and a great exhalation escaped the corpse, air forced from the lungs as the ribs collapsed. The villagers shrieked and crossed themselves. See. He was breathing still. Riedel wiped his brow, the cold sweat stinging. It is, again, normal for gas to escape after puncture. The villagers did not care whether it was gas or unholy breath. They believed the act had saved them. And perhaps, in their way, it did. Within 2 weeks, the death stopped. People slept without nightmares. The village returned to its rhythms, quiet as snowfall. Yet Riedel could not forget the sight of the corpse, the tremble of his own hands, or the uneasy feeling that belief itself held power that science could not easily dispel. Before leaving, he asked Elijah, "Do you truly believe he was a vampire?" Elijah looked toward the mountains, where the sun had begun to melt the snow. Men die of fear as much as illness, he said softly. Whether he was or wasn't, the fear has been buried. Riedel rode back to Belgrade with his journal full of observations. His report would become one of many that spread across Europe, sparking fascination and dread. He had intended to extinguish superstition, yet he unknowingly helped ignite the most widespread vampire panic the continent had ever seen. The real 18th century vampire panic: what happened and why? The story above is fictional, but it is inspired by the real events of the 18th century vampire panic, a phenomenon that swept through Eastern and Central Europe and influenced modern vampire lore, including Bram Stoker's Dracula. 1. Background: the frontier of empires. During the early 1700s, large parts of Serbia, Wallachia, and the Balkans were borderlands between the Habsburg, Austrian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. The region was culturally diverse and war-torn, with villages often isolated by geography, language, and conflict. Folk beliefs thrived in such conditions, particularly the idea of the vampire, a spirit or corpse that returned from the grave to torment the living. Unlike later aristocratic vampires, these were typically villagers who became revenants due to improper burial, violent death, or moral wrongdoing. 2. The incidents that sparked panic. The vampire panic did not emerge from fiction. It erupted because of actual, documented investigations conducted by Austrian military physicians. 2 major cases are famous. Epeta Blagojevic, 1725. In the village of Kiselova, or Kiselova, 8 villagers died suddenly after claiming Blagojevic's spirit visited them. When officials exhumed him, the body appeared fresh, with new skin, longer hair, and blood at the mouth, common signs of normal decomposition but interpreted as vampirism. A stake was driven through the corpse, and the panic spread. Arnold Pauli, 1726 and 1732. A soldier named Arnold Pauli reportedly said he had been attacked by a vampire and cured himself by eating soil from the vampire's grave. After Pauli died in an accident, villagers claimed he returned to torment them. An exhumation again showed decomposition misinterpreted as supernatural. A second wave of deaths occurred years later, adding more fuel to the panic. These incidents produced official reports that circulated throughout Europe. 3. Why did the panic spread so widely? The vampire panic became continent-wide because of a perfect storm of social, scientific, and political factors. A. Lack of medical understanding. Epidemics ravaged rural communities. People died suddenly or mysteriously, often with symptoms like night terrors, weakness and wasting, bloody froth at the mouth after death. Many illnesses, tuberculosis, rabies, poisoning, were unknown or poorly understood. Vampirism became a way to explain suffering. B. Confusion over decomposition. Most villages never saw bodies after burial. But during exhumations, skin slippage made corpses appear fresh. Gases inflated the body. Blood pooled in the mouth. Hair and nails looked longer because skin retracted. Bodies made groaning sounds when punctured. These natural processes looked horrifying and unnatural, especially to religious communities. C. The role of the Habsburg military. Austrian officials, trying to maintain order, documented these events. Ironically, their reports, meant to stop superstition, were published across Europe, giving vampirism scientific legitimacy. One famous investigator, Fluckinger, wrote a detailed 1732 report on the Pauli case, describing symptoms and signs of vampirism as villagers understood them. Newspapers, scholars, and theologians discussed the reports intensely. Thus, rather than suppressing belief, the reports validated it. D. Religious tensions. In Orthodox Christian tradition, improper burial or a soul unable to rest could result in a restless dead. Catholic and Protestant scholars reacted strongly, debating whether vampires were demons, corpses, or illusions. Theological debates kept the subject in public attention. E. Fear and psychological contagion. Communities living under hardship were vulnerable to collective fear. Once a narrative took hold, a dead person is attacking us, it spread quickly, especially in close-knit villages. 4. How the panic ended. By the later 18th century, Enlightenment thinkers pushed back. Scholars like Voltaire ridiculed the reports. Medical knowledge improved, and governments discouraged exhumations. By the early 1800s, the panic subsided, but the lore it created transformed into the aristocratic vampire image in Gothic literature. 5. Legacy of the vampire panic. The 18th century vampire panic provided real, documented cases that inspired fiction, shaped European ideas of revenants, influenced writers like John Polidori and Bram Stoker, embedded the stake through the heart and fresh corpse imagery in popular culture. In many ways, the modern vampire myth owes its existence to frightened villagers, misunderstood science, and the power of rumor. The romantic vampire, seduction and shadows. She had been walking home beneath the lantern-lit arches of Duskbourne Square, her arms wrapped tightly around a stack of old books she'd borrowed from the university archives. The fog crept slowly along the cobblestones, curling around her ankles like silent cats. It was a place she'd crossed 1,000 times, but that evening the dark felt occupied, not threatening, exactly, but watchful. Then she saw him. A man stood at the far end of the square, half framed by the wrought iron gate of the abandoned garden. His figure was tall, draped in an old-fashioned coat of deep midnight blue. The lamplight didn't quite touch him, it slid off his form as though unwilling. Yet his face was unmistakably clear, pale, striking, unnervingly calm. His eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were the color of an eclipse, black, lead with something ancient. Ilara froze, her breath knotting in her chest. She had seen portraits of men with such eyes only in the folklore section of the library, always underlined in cautionary red ink. The man bowed his head slightly, as though acknowledging her fear, or granting permission for it. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth enough to disturb the fog. She swallowed. Do I know you? No, he said. But I have known of you for some time. Ilara took a step back. He lifted his hand gently. Forgive me. I did not intend to frighten you. His tone, strangely, held sincerity. This city has grown dangerous after moonrise. You should not walk alone. And yet here I am, she said, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. A faint smile touched his lips, as though he appreciated her attempt at bravery. That is precisely why I am here. He stepped forward, but not too close, leaving space between them, as though inviting her to choose whether to stay or flee. Who are you? She whispered. My name is Veros. The name landed like a quiet thunder in her memory. She had read it once, in a brittle manuscript about Duskborn's forgotten aristocracy, a family erased during the Crimson Plague centuries ago. But that was impossible. He looked no older than 30. You're lying, she said. I would not waste your time with lies. His gaze drifted to the books in her arms. You search for truths hidden in shadows. I simply dwell in them. The fog thickened. A sudden gust extinguished one of the lanterns. Ilara's heartbeat echoed in her ears, rapid, insistent. Why are you watching me? Because, Veros said softly, you walk the night with the curiosity of someone who does not yet understand that curiosity calls to things like me. And what exactly are you? He didn't answer with words. Instead, he turned his face slightly, revealing a glint of elongated fangs tucked behind his lower lip, not threateningly displayed, but undeniably real. A vampire. The stories she'd read had always described them as monstrous. Yet there he stood, not attacking, not demanding, simply waiting, as though her judgment mattered. Her fingers tightened around her books, knuckles whitening. Instinct screamed at her to run. But another instinct, the one that had always pulled her toward hidden archives and forbidden manuscripts, held her still. You expect me to believe you're not here to harm me? She asked. I expect nothing. His eyes softened. But I would hope for your trust. Why? Because, Veros said quietly, I have watched centuries pass. I have witnessed kingdoms collapse and cities burn. I have felt humanity shrink away from me, fear me, hunt me. But you, his voice lowered to a whisper. You stroll into libraries and resurrect memories the world has tried to bury. You see the forgotten. And in all my years, I have rarely seen mortals brave enough to look at shadows and ask them to speak. A shiver traced down her spine, part fear, part fascination. Ilara exhaled slowly. So what do you want with me? To protect you, he said simply. From what? Veros's expression grew grave. Another of my kind. One who does not share my restraint. He caught your scent last week when you passed the old chapel ruins. Since then, he has taken interest. Interest, she repeated, her voice cracking. A dangerous one, Veros said. Why tell me this? Why help me? His gaze flicked downward, almost vulnerable. Because I am, despite everything, what I once was. A man with choices. And I choose not to let you suffer for simply existing. Ilara felt something shift in her chest. His words were strangely human, painful in their honesty. What do you want me to do? She asked. Allow me to escort you at night. Nothing more. And if I say no? He nodded, accepting. Then I will still watch from afar. You will not notice me. You will not hear me. But I will not allow harm to reach you. She studied him carefully. You're asking for my trust. Yes, he said, but not your freedom. The distinction unsettled her, but also, unexpectedly, comforted her. Walk me home, she said finally. Veros's eyes warmed, barely, but unmistakably. As you wish. They walked through the fog, side by side. His footsteps made no sound, yet he did not hide his presence. Each time the wind grew too sharp, he shifted subtly, shielding her from the cold. When they reached the stone bridge over Moonwater Canal, he paused, watching the dark reflection ripple below. You are not afraid, he said. I am, she admitted. Just, not only afraid. He turned his head. What else? Curious. Veros's smile returned, small but genuine. Curiosity is more dangerous than fear. Or more powerful. He studied her, admiration flickering behind his controlled composure. Perhaps. When they reached her doorstep, Ilara hesitated. The lantern above her door cracked with insects, its dim glow contrasting sharply with Veros's unnatural stillness. "Will he come for me tonight?" she asked. "No," Veros said. "He waits for the new moon. 3 nights from now. And until then, I will remain near," he said. "If you wish it." Ilara felt the gravity of her choice. This was no passing encounter. If she allowed him into her life, even as a protector, her world would shift in irreversible ways. "I wish it," she said. Veros bowed his head. "Then I am yours to summon." She stepped inside but turned back once more. "Why me, Veros? Truly." He hesitated, the slightest break in his composure. "Because you remind me," he said, "of the person I might have been if the centuries had been kinder." Their eyes held for a moment, one mortal, one immortal, both caught in the fragile space between fear and longing. Then he faded into the shadows, dissolving into mist as though he had never been there at all. The next 3 nights unfolded like a dream stitched with dread. Veros appeared whenever she stepped outside after dusk, materializing from darkness with the subtlety of an old promise. He never touched her, never crossed a line. His presence was a quiet shield, an offering rather than a demand. He told her fragments of his centuries-long life, always the gentlest pieces, never the hauntings beneath. She, in turn, shared stories of the book she studied, the mysteries she hunted through pages worn thin by time. Their conversations were a dance of guarded truths and cautious fascination. On the 3rd night, the night of the new moon, the air tasted metallic. Veros met her at the edge of the garden ruins, his expression sharp with tension. "He is close," he said. "Should I hide?" "No. You should stay behind me." "How dangerous is he?" Veros inhaled slowly. "He is everything my kind is feared for. Hunger without restraint. Desire without consent." Ilara's breath trembled. "Can you defeat him?" Veros didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, placing himself between her and the darkness. A low growl slid through the night. A figure emerged, eyes burning crimson, fangs bared in a predatory smile. His gaze snapped to Ilara. "She smells exquisite," the newcomer hissed. "You guard her jealously." "She is not yours," Veros said, voice icy. "She is mortal," the creature snarled. "Nothing is hers to decide." Veros's fury rippled like cold fire. "She decides everything." They clashed. The fight was a blur of shadows slicing through shadows, fangs flashing, claws ripping through air, the world shaking with supernatural force. Veros moved with controlled precision, the other vampire, with feral violence. Ilara stood frozen, heart slamming her ribs, yet unwilling to run. Veros stumbled once, just once, and the predator lunged toward her. Ilara did the only thing she could, she raised her voice. "Stop." It wasn't a command backed by power, only fierce human will. But it distracted the attacker, long enough for Veros to strike. The final blow echoed through the ruins. The creature dissolved into ash, scattered by the night wind. Veros collapsed to one knee, breathing hard, his usually pristine composure fractured. Ilara rushed to him. "Veros." He looked up, his face drawn. "You should not have stayed. I wasn't going to abandon you." A faint, pained smile touched his lips. "You are extraordinary." He rose unsteadily. She steadied him, her hand against his arm. He didn't recoil. "Ilara," he murmured, "I should leave now. I am wounded. You should not see me like this." "I want to," she said softly. Veros's eyes flickered, surprise, longing, terror of hope. He lowered his forehead close to hers, stopping an inch away. "You cannot know what you invite. I know you've protected me. I know you've been honest with me. And I know I trust you." His breath stilled. "Then the danger is no longer outside," he whispered. "It is me." Ilara smiled gently. "I choose my dangers." For the first time, Veros looked truly undone. He closed his eyes, steadying himself. "Then I will stay. For as long as you wish." The night held its breath as they stood together, mortal and vampire, both transformed by the simple, impossible act of choosing trust over fear. The shadows no longer felt threatening. They felt like witnesses to the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. This story draws on the classic Gothic romance tradition: dark, atmospheric settings, mysterious immortals, moral conflict, and a slow-burn emotional connection. The seduction in the title refers not to physical intimacy but to the pull between fear and fascination, a hallmark of romantic Gothic literature. Veros embodies both danger and restraint, allowing the story to explore attraction without removing agency or consent from either character. Ilara is written as intellectually curious, valuing truth over comfort. Her attraction to Veros is rooted not in helplessness but in the fact that she sees humanity in him despite his monstrous nature. Veros's appeal comes from vulnerability, honesty, and protective instinct, rather than predatory dominance. Their dynamic is intentionally balanced. Veros offers protection but never possession. Ilara feels fear but also autonomy and choice. The central conflict, the threat from the other vampire, symbolizes the boundary between romanticized darkness and true danger. Veros's gentleness contrasts sharply with the feral aggressor, reinforcing that his restraint and respect for Ilara are what make their connection romantic rather than coercive. The ending avoids a final resolution, instead opening the door to future interactions built on mutual trust, curiosity, and the slow, deliberate unfolding of a relationship between very different beings. 21st century vampires, breaking the mold. The first clue that the world had changed was that no one screamed anymore when they saw a vampire. They sighed, annoyed, inconvenienced, as if a vampire showing up at their door was roughly equivalent to someone canvassing for a political campaign or selling cable plans. So when Myra Calder opened her South Brooklyn apartment door on a rainy Tuesday morning and saw a pale young man with tired silver eyes, a soaked hoodie, and a laminated government-issued licensed hemovore, level 2 badge, she didn't bat an eye. "You're late," she said. "I know," the vampire replied, pushing soggy black hair out of his face. "The F train stalled again. Also someone threw garlic at me." He paused. "Even though it doesn't do anything." Myra stepped aside to let him in. "Humans are dramatic. Comes with the species." The vampire snorted softly. His name, according to the paperwork, was Adrian Hale, age 27, well, in biological appearance. Actual age, 112. He moved with the kind of heavy caution Myra had come to recognize in the new generation of integrated vampires, those who had completed government training and legally registered with the Department of Coexistence. They were required to take empathy courses, keep feeding logs, abide by nighttime curfews, undergo regular evaluations, and, in level 2 cases like Adrian, feed only from consenting plasma donors or synthetic packets. The rules were tedious, their PR still shaky, and yet, slowly, society was adjusting. Myra gestured toward the small dining table. "Your sample?" Adrian slid a temperature-controlled pouch out of his backpack. "Filled this morning at the clinic. I hope it works for the study." "It will," she said. "Sit. You look like you're melting." He sat, dripping quietly onto her wood floor. Myra handed him a towel. "You didn't need to come in person, you know. They could have couriered it." Adrian shrugged. "I wanted to. I like hearing about the research directly. After a beat, and you're easy to talk to." This surprised her. Myra rarely registered as easy to anyone. She was abrupt, analytical, too caught up in her work to soften her edges. Yet she found she didn't mind his observation. "Tell me," he said, leaning forward, "is it true the team found a genetic marker that predicts feeding aggression?" "Yes," Myra replied. "But it's not aggression. It's sensitivity, how strongly your body signals hunger. The old myths framed it as lack of control, but it's just biology." Adrian exhaled, shoulders loosening. "Good. I'm tired of everyone acting like we're one bad day away from snapping." Myra gave him a careful look. "Are you?" He laughed. "If I were, I wouldn't voluntarily take 2 subways in the rain to hand-deliver a blood sample." She smiled despite herself. 3 months passed, rain dissolving into the strange early spring heat that had become normal in New York. Adrian started showing up more often, first with extra samples, then with questions, then with tea, which he couldn't taste, and pastries, which he insisted she eat to offset his gloom. He lingered after appointments, helping Myra organize lab reports, fix her printer, or debate ethics surrounding hemovore rights. "I don't like the word vampire," he said once, tearing open a synthetic packet with a sound that made Myra wince. It's loaded. Myth-soaked. Fear-shaped. I prefer hemovore. Or just person. But names carry history, Myra replied. And history is how cultures grow. He raised an eyebrow. History is also how cultures justify fear. Myra didn't disagree. Their conversations grew deeper, more frequent, more personal. Adrian revealed small details of vampire life, how sunlight stung but didn't burn, how sleeping was optional but comforting, how cravings were more like migraines than urges. Myra, in turn, confessed things she'd rarely said aloud, that her research had cost her relationships, that she sometimes doubted whether coexistence was possible, that she found the old horror stories both insulting and darkly funny. You know, Adrian said one evening, my grandmother used to hide in barns to feed in secret. Humans chased her with pitchforks. Myra blinked. That actually happened. Oh no, he said with a sly grin. She made it up to scare us. She loved the drama. Myra threw a pen at him. He caught it effortlessly, reflexes faster than a blink. Which reminded her, every time, what he was. What he could be. What he worked so hard not to be. Trouble arrived in late May. A rogue group of unregistered vampires, calling themselves the Sanguine Sovereignty, attacked a plasma transport convoy in Pennsylvania. No deaths, but the political fallout was immediate. Talk shows were loud, senators louder, and rumors even louder still, that vampires were organizing, plotting, hungering. Old stereotypes flared back to life. Myra noticed the effects instantly, people giving Adrian wide berths on the subway, security guards checking his ID twice, neighbors whispering when he entered her building. You should stay home for a while, Myra said gently as she catalogued samples. Just until things calm down. Adrian shook his head. If we hide when things get bad, humans will think guilt is the reason. He tightened his backpack straps. Besides, it's worse at home. My building manager keeps pretending the elevator is out whenever I'm around. That's illegal. He shrugged. So is half the city. Myra hissed sharply. Adrian. He looked at her, and in that look was something raw, not hunger, not desperation, but fatigue. Centuries of it. I'm trying, he said softly. We all are. But we're always balancing between being too human or not human enough. Myra stepped closer. You're not alone. Something flickered across his face, gratitude, and something else. But Adrian stepped back, carefully re-establishing distance. I should go. Curfew's in 30 minutes. She let him go. 2 nights later, he didn't show up for his appointment. Myra called. Texted. Nothing. By morning, panic gnawed at her stomach. She rushed to the Department of Coexistence office, a dim, bureaucratically stale building that smelled of burnt coffee and overworked air conditioning. Reception stared at her sternly. And you are? Myra called her. I'm one of the lead researchers for the hemovore integration study. I need to know the status of Adrian Hale. The receptionist typed, frowned, typed again. He's been detained, she said carefully. Myra's blood went cold. On what grounds? Violation of curfew. Found outside after hours when the sovereignty threat warning is still active. That's ridiculous, he was probably coming from the clinic. Let me talk to him. The receptionist said, that's not allowed during evaluation. He'll be released if he's not a threat. He's not a threat. Oh. Myra slammed her palms on the desk. You know who I am? I helped draft the feeding sensitivity metric. I know what makes a hemovore dangerous, and it's not being caught after curfew. A tense silence filled the room. Finally, the receptionist sighed. Let me call a supervisor. Adrian sat in a dull interrogation room, wrists free but posture rigid. His eyes lit up when Myra entered, then dimmed with worry. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. I absolutely should. Myra sat across from him. What happened? Adrian stared at his hands. I wasn't thinking. I stayed late helping an older hemovore whose legs lock up during heat waves. I lost track of time. The patrol flagged me. They didn't care about context. Myra's jaw clenched. This is discrimination, not protocol. Myra, he said gently, don't get yourself in trouble. Too late. He blinked, then laughed quietly. You're braver than me. She leaned forward. No. I just refuse to let society dig trenches again when we're finally filling them. For a moment, their eyes held, human brown and vampire silver, and the space between them felt electrically alive. Then the door opened. An officer entered, holding a clipboard. Mr. Hale, you're released. Evaluation cleared. Your advocate here was persistent. Adrian shot Myra a grateful look. Thank you. Myra crossed her arms. Don't thank me yet. They'll keep monitoring you. That's nothing new. Adrian stood, but hesitated. Walk me out. She did. Outside, dusk stained the sky violet. Adrian breathed in the night air like freedom itself. Myra said softly, you don't have to keep proving you're harmless. He studied her. And if I'm not harmless? The question wasn't a threat. It was a fear. Myra stepped closer until she could see faint blue veins beneath his pale skin. Then I trust you to choose who you want to be. He exhaled shakily. You make it sound simple. It's not. She smiled. But then again, neither is humanity. A slow, warm smile spread across his face, one that lit his eyes in a way she'd never seen. Come on, she said. You're dripping anxiety all over the sidewalk. Let's get tea. He chuckled. I can't taste tea. You can watch me drink it. That's half the fun. Adrian shook his head affectionately and followed her down the street, leaving behind the weight of old myths and stepping into something new, uncertain, complicated, hopeful. A world where the monsters weren't always who history claimed they were. A world where people could break molds instead of being trapped in them. A world where vampires learned to be visible, and humans learned not to flinch. The 21st century, Myra thought, wasn't perfect. But it was trying. And so were they. This story reimagines vampires in the 21st century by breaking traditional tropes and exploring themes grounded in modern society. 1. Vampires as social minorities, not monsters. Instead of being hunted creatures of legend, vampires function as a regulated minority group navigating bureaucracy, prejudice, and daily inconveniences. Licensing systems, feeding restrictions, and public fear echo real-world social struggles without directly mirroring any one group. 2. Science over superstition. The protagonist, Myra, is a researcher studying hemovore biology. Her scientific approach replaces old supernatural assumptions. Sunlight doesn't kill vampires, garlic doesn't repel them, and feeding urges are biological rather than monstrous. 3. Human-vampire connection based on empathy. The bond between Myra and Adrian highlights shared emotional experiences rather than predatory dynamics. Their relationship pushes against the stereotype of vampires as seducers or threats, showing instead vulnerability, humor, and mutual support. 4. Modern problems, modern fears. With rogue groups causing political tension, society grapples with collective suspicion, reflecting how minority communities often face blame for individual actions. Adrian's detention exemplifies the tension between public safety and discrimination. 5. Rewriting the monster narrative. The story emphasizes agency. Vampires can choose who they become. Myra sees Adrian not as a threat but as someone constantly negotiating identity in a world that mislabels him. 6. A hopeful, mixed future tone. The world is not utopian. There are rules, prejudice, and fear. But there is also progress, connection, and the slow dismantling of old myths, mirroring contemporary social evolution. Thanks for venturing into the darkness with us as we explored the evolution of vampires through the ages. From ancient folklore to modern reinventions, these Night Stalkers continue to mirror our deepest fears and fascinations. If you enjoyed uncovering the history behind these iconic creatures, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Drop a comment below telling us which era of vampire lore intrigued you the most, and what supernatural topic you'd like to see next. Until then, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, legends never truly die. See you in the next deep dive into the unknown.